I have done a ton of research. I've looked all over YouTube. I think I finished YouTube in this respect, looking for very specific CAN bus reverse engineering basics with how to get that data into a Motec display using the Motec software. And I haven't been able to find a single video that covers it from soup to nuts. So I'm happy to share with you a video that does, in fact, exactly that. Hi everybody, how are you? My name is Dan Dulac and welcome back to my channel where I am building a V10 powered Ultima Evolution convertible. We've done a ton of videos on the build, a lot of mechanical stuff. On this video, in fact the next 2 or 3 videos, we're going to focus heavily on the electronics and specifically reverse engineering the OEM CAN bus on the Huracan / Audi R8 Powertrain CAN bus, for which obviously I have the V10 engine and DCT transmission out of a late model Huracan. So on this video, we're going to break this video up into 3 pieces. On today's video, we're going to focus on the very basics and introduction on how I went about reverse engineering the CAN bus for my setup, all for the purpose of getting the data into my Motec C127 display. I have done a ton of research. I've looked all over YouTube. I think I finished YouTube in this respect, looking for very specific CAN bus reverse engineering basics with how to get that data into a Motec display using the Motec software. And I haven't been able to find a single video that covers it from soup to nuts. So I'm happy to share with you a video that does, in fact, exactly that. An A to Z starting guide on how to get started with reverse engineering your CAN bus, identifying telemetry and data, pulling that data into a database, CAN bus database file or DBC file, and then pulling that into your Motec display and configuring and creating a display, a dash display for a Motec display, or really any other display for that matter, because the process is exactly the same. So I'm excited to share this video with you. I've done a ton of research and I'm looking forward to give back to the community and all of you who've helped me along the way in getting to the point where I am today. So without further ado, let's jump into part 1 right now. All right, the first thing I want to do here is just show the CAN bus topology for which we're about to do some reverse engineering. So this is my basic setup here. You can see my engine control modules. I have 2 of them, one for 5 cylinders, the other for the other 5 cylinders. That's how that works in the Audi R8 and Lamborghini Huracan. And then I've got the transmission controller that you can see there. They're both on the same CAN bus as my Motec C127 display. And that display has 2 CAN bus inputs, CAN 2 and CAN 1. So on CAN 2, I've set that for 500 kilobits per second. That is the OEM CAN bus speed for the Audi R8 and Lamborghini Huracan. And then you can see I've got the OBD2 connector there as well. And that's my interface into streaming CAN bus data. At the bottom of the screen, you can see I've got my CL1000. I'll describe that here briefly in a moment. And then my laptop that I'll be using as my CAN analyzer, again, tapping into the 500 kilobit CAN bus. Then in the upper right, you see I've got a 1 megabit CAN bus, and that is for all the Motec components. That's the PDM, my 8 button, my rotary button controller, as well as all of that plugs into CAN 1 on my Motec display. There is a bunch of software that I'm going to use in this video. All of this is going to be linked below in the description of this video. Savvy CAN Analyzer, you're going to see a lot of that. That is free to download. VCDS, this is the VAGCOM tool for Skoda cars, Audi, VW, Lamborghini, so forth. Although that is not free, but you could use a basic OBD2 scanner for some of the data as well. And then some of the other various software components that are free as well that we're going to see in this video and the next video when I go ahead and configure the Motec dash in its entirety. So with that basic description, let's jump right in. All right, we're going to get to setting up the electronics, my laptop, the software to do our first bit of CAN bus reverse engineering. And we're going to start super simple. So as I described earlier, here is my CSS Electronics CL1000. It's got a DB9 connector on one end, and then it goes to the OBD2 connector on the other. And then a simple USB port that will go into the laptop. That's the white cable you see there. So that's a simple setup. As soon as we plug this in to the OBD2 port underneath the dash, it's going to, and once it senses the CAN bus operational, this is going to start recording. So this is kind of a headless recording device. However, after you plug it in, after it senses there's CAN bus operational, you plug it into your laptop, and then that makes it a live feed directly into the SavvyCAN software, which I'm going to show you as well. Then I can monitor the CAN bus live. So that's what I'm going to show you. We're going to get this stuff plugged in, set up. I'm going to get myself in the seat. I'm going to show you the reverse engineering process of first, very simple, how to detect and locate the CAN bus signal, the CAN ID for the brake switch. There's a method to the madness here. We're going to start with something simple. So let me get set up in the cockpit and we'll get this party started with reverse engineering my CAN bus. In order to work with the CL1000, definitely download the link that's on the CSS Electronics website. There's multiple versions of SavvyCAN. Given this is open source software, there's multiple versions of this out on the GitHub. But use the one the CSS Electronics recommends. That way you'll know it'll link up so we can live stream. That's the beauty of this, is the CL1000 integrates perfectly with the SavvyCAN software. All right, the first thing we got to do is we got to connect our CL1000 to the CAN bus and get some live data streaming here. So what I'm going to do first is we're just going to turn the ignition on. I'm not going to start the engine. That's the key. We want to minimize the amount of CAN bus traffic, so let's not start anything we don't have to, but just the basics to get the CAN data streaming, and we could do that with just the ignition. So I'm just going to turn the ignition on here. Now, on my CL1000, as soon as it recognizes a CAN bus, it's going to start recording. So this is a headless device, which is nice. You can just plug it in, it'll just start recording. So you can see here, there's some blinking LEDs. That's what you want to see. That's when you know it's recording in real time. Now I'm going to plug this into my laptop so that I can stream that data directly to my laptop. I am going to open up SavvyCAN here, and we've got to connect to that device now. So let's go up here and open connection window. I want to add a new device connection, and what we want to select here is the QT serial bus devices. So if I select that, it automatically detects my CSS USB to CAN device, and it's on COM 8. So as soon as I click this create new connection, on the background window in the upper right over here, you're going to see frames being captured in real time. So let's go ahead and do that. So there we go. The other thing you'll notice here is that it connects at the default speed of 500 kilobits per second. That's what we want. It auto-detected that. And now we are good to go. Okay, so now we are connected. And you can see all the data. Now this is scrolling to the bottom. So as I move this, you can see my mouse here keeps, because there's tons of data going in. So what I like to do is put this into overwrite mode. And what this will do is this will stream only the active data and puts everything active at the top of the file. So you can see here the time deltas, the attribute IDs, the number of frames that it's being counted, and on the far right, the data that's within those frames is changing. So we're connected into the CAN bus now. Now we can start to do some of our initial reverse engineering on this. The one I love to start with is something that is super easy to manipulate. Something, a switch, something super easy, like a brake switch. A brake switch is simply on or off. Super easy to control. Obviously, just put your foot on the brake. You can manually control it, and you can watch the data in real time since, again, you're in control. It makes it easier to kind of call out the data bit that's being changed when you hit that brake switch. All right, so the view I like to use the most, and again, in SavvyCAN, this RE, reverse engineering tools, there's a bunch of different options here. But to start with reverse engineering, I like to go in and use the sniffer capability. So this is a little bit different view in that you see here all the changing colors. So you can see all the active CAN IDs starting from 80 all the way down to 6 Charlie Charlie. And the way CAN bus works, one of the ways it works, is it prioritizes the lowest CAN ID. And that's usually your most sensitive traffic. And that corroborates here with the frequency. You could see the first, 4 or 5 attributes here are running at 100 times a second. It's collecting data 100 times a second. That's a lot. That's high frequency. So these are things like airbag sensors, brakes, throttle position, something that you really need a high degree of granularity. That's what you're going to find. Things like temperature, oil temperature, transmission temperature, water temperature, those types of things, those aren't going to be transmitted on the CAN ID at 100 times a second. Those are going to be more like 1 time, 2 time, maybe 5 times a second. And so that will give you a clue as well to look for those down in this lower, towards the bottom of this list, where we see the 2 hertz and 1 hertz variables, kind of in the 600 CAN ID range. That's another clue. All right, so we can see all our active data here. Pretty chatty, even though the engine is not running. Still pretty chatty traffic going on the CAN bus. And what I want to do is, since I'm not touching anything, I haven't touched a switch or anything, I want to mute this busy traffic, call it noise for the moment. And I can do that by clicking this notch button. So what notch does, and you can see here, 750 millisecond is the default notch interval. What this will do is it will mute any data that is changing within 750 milliseconds. So any data that's changing that fast, 3/4 of a second, it's going to mute, which is nice because that will help me isolate, again, in this case, my brake switch. So I'm going to click notch here, and we will see a lot of those color changing going away. Now the colors that you see, green indicates a value going up, increasing, red indicates a value going down or decreasing. As you notice, all this is in hexadecimal. So when you get into this, you kind of start to be able to do hexadecimal conversions in your head, believe it or not. Here we have a relatively clean slate, and so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to put my foot on the brake, and we're going to look for, in this case, a green bit, or a bit that's changed, highlighted green or red, doesn't matter. I just want to find that bit change. Okay, so here we go. I'm going to put my foot on the brake in 3, 2, 1. Foot's on the brake. Boom, we just saw a change up here. The number 47 you could see. Foot off the brake in 3, 2, 1. Off, it goes to 43. Back on the brake, 47. 3, 2, 1, off the brake, 43. So that's a clue. That is CAN ID 105, 0x105, byte number 4. And so that's how you read this. Across the top column, each column there's 8 bytes in any CAN ID. So we can see they're labeled. Number 4 is here. Attribute 105, CAN ID 105, byte number 4. So that's our first clue, brake switch. The next thing I want to do is I want to make sure I'm only looking at the bit within that byte that's changing. There's 8 bits in a byte. This next view is going to help kind of illustrate this for you clearly. But I want to just grab the bit that's changing. So if I go over to this menu pick here and tick the box, view bits, this is going to change my view. The other thing I can do, since I've narrowed it down to attribute 105, I can filter out all these others on this list here on the lower right. So I'm going to do none and then just select 105. So now we're just looking at 105, and you can see it's about 100 times a second this data is being collected, which makes sense. Brake switch is pretty important piece of telemetry, so you want high frequency
data updates with a brake switch, for example. Now, we mentioned it's byte number 4, so let's look in byte number 4 which bit changes. These are all the bits you see here. There's 8 bits in that byte, and the way software, CAN bus software, reads this is reads bits from right to left. So this is bit position 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 8 bits in a byte, 0 through 7. Okay, so let's take a look at this byte number 4. I'm going to hit the brake in 3, 2, 1, brake. Foot's on the brake, foot's on the brake. Now I'm going to take it off. 3, 2, 1, off, on, off. So now you can see bit 0, 1, 2. Only the second bit is changing. Bit position number 2. Okay, again, 0, 1, 2. Remember that. That's key. It doesn't start at 1, it starts at 0. So bit position number 2. So we write that down. CAN ID 105, byte number 4, bit position number 2. That's brake switch. So we write that down. Okay. All right. So I am going to now try to find my throttle position. Again, a very easy thing to control and manipulate and try to find amongst all this data. So we're going to go ahead and look for throttle position. So I'm going to simply go back and look at all the attributes again, because again, we don't know which attribute throttle position is in. And I'm going to turn off bit view, so I'm back to my normal view. I've still got this notched. It's still notched at 750 milliseconds. Now I'm going to hit the throttle, and we're going to see what bytes change on this view. So ready? I'm going to hit the throttle in 3, 2, 1. Give it partial gas, and you can see some data updating here. Okay, and as I move the throttle in or out, up or down, you can see this bit. Now there's a few things changing on here, which makes this a little tricky. What I am looking for, take my foot off the gas. Let's start with 1, for example. So we noticed bit position number 4 on 105. When I put my foot on the brake, it's changing. It says 42 now. Which, again, there's different byte positions in that bit. We know that brake is bit number 2. I bet if I looked over to my view bits, and let's look at just 105 again, and I hit the gas pedal, let's see, bit 2 will not change. We know that's brake. Let's see what other bits change in here. Ready? I'm going to hit the throttle in 3, 2, 1. Aha! So we see bit position number 0 changes. But it's only 1 bit. So we know that that's not it, because, again, throttle position is not a 1 or a 0, on or off. Throttle position is a percentage, a ratio, 0 to 100. So we want to look for something that's changing variably, not just 1 bit. Probably 8 bits is what's changing here. All right, so let's go back to all. I'm going to turn my view bits off. So we know it's not that one, so you can kind of see it's kind of a process of elimination. But because I'm looking at throttle position, we suspect the initial value is 0. The starting value is 0, and the maximum value is going to be hexadecimal starting with F. 0xF, either FF, FA, something in the very high range of the hexadecimal value. So let's look for that. So again, I'm going to hit the throttle, 3, 2, 1. And I'm looking, it's definitely not going to be two bytes spanning across. So the top row is, we're not going to even worry about that. These aren't really changing when I press variably induce the throttle here. But one I do see is right over here. Byte number 6, again on 105. Off the throttle is back to 0. On the throttle, full, FA, maximum. That's a clue. That's what I want to look at. All right, so byte number 6, 105. Let's turn all of these off. Let's look at 105. Let's look in the bit mode. Again, we're looking at byte number 6 of 105. It's all zeros right now. My foot's off the gas. So let's put my foot on the throttle. There we go. We start to see a bunch of bits changing across the board, all the way up to there is full throttle. So we see every bit changing. So we know the data length for throttle position is the full 8 bits is the data length. We write that down. Hex ID 105, byte number 6 with a data length of 8 bits. That's our throttle position. So now we've got some basic data we can go work with here. I'm actually going to go and we're going to plot some of this out on a real-time graph, which is pretty cool. So if I go over back to my tools, I can do a new graphing window. This time, first thing I'm going to look at is brake switch. We found that. So I'm going to add my brake switch. Simple on or off. It's easy to graph. I'm going to right click here and say add a new graph. We think this is going to be brake switch. So I just put a name. You can name it whatever you want. My ID 0x105 is my hex ID, CAN ID. And we know that it was byte position number 4. So the way you read this is down the left-hand column here, the y-axis, it's bytes 0 through 7. Again, 8 bytes in any CAN ID. And then across the top is the bit position within that byte. So remember, 8 bits in a byte. So we know that with brake switch, we're looking at byte position number 4, bit position number 2. So the byte was number 4, that's here, and the bit position is number 2. So I again reference in my column here, column 2, that's bit position number 2 for byte number 4. And I click this right here. That is my brake switch byte. Okay? Byte and bit. We know the data length is just one bit, so we could put 1 in there. And then we're going to check this little endian. There's tons of videos out there on YouTube that really go into the nuts and bolts of the CAN bus protocol and all this. I'm not going to do that in this video. There's tons. You could do like I did. Go out there, study. You can learn a lot from it. I'm just trying to give you the highlights, the quick and dirty to get you started. But little endian is simply the order in which the bits are read here. Little endian is for Skoda cars, so Audi, Porsche, Lamborghini, VW. Our little endian, I think GM is big endian. And again, that's just the order in which the software reads the bytes, the dash module, the data logger, whatever it is. So you'll want to Google that for your particular vehicle, and you'll find that online. And I'll show you that here in the next part of this video, how you can use some online tools to go out and kind of reverse engineer. Is your car little endian, big endian, as it relates to byte order reading when you're looking at this software. Signed doesn't matter. It's not positive or negative, doesn't matter here. And the rest of this stuff we can ignore for now. So I'm going to simply go and add this value to this graph. Next thing I want to do, and this caught me out when I first was learning this, you want to rescale to data. And immediately you could see where I've hit the brake switch historically on my time axis. What I can do on this chart is if I click on the y-axis here, I can change the scale up and down, in or out. So you can adjust this based on what you need. Move your mouse outside, click again. Same thing on the x-axis. You can zoom in or out on this data. Okay. I'm going to click outside the box. And I'm going to scroll over and look for the most real time. Okay, so there's the end of my line. That's marching across the screen down here. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to hit my foot on the brake and we're going to watch this line change in real time. 3, 2, 1. Boom. 0 to 1. And as long as I hold my foot on the brake, the value is going to be 1. So you can see here. I'm going to take my foot off the brake right now. It comes down. So that's just a way to chart this. Not really anything major here, just that we can see the values changing in real time. Really where this data graphing comes in is when you're looking for like a temperature value, a variable value that's either steadily climbing, decreasing, or an RPM value, so that you could see that charted in real time. That kind of helps you locate and reverse engineer that attribute simply by using this graphing window. So that's brake. The next thing I'm going to do, I'm going to right click on this and let's add another graph. And this time we're going to look at my throttle position. So we can name it whatever we want. I'm just going to call it throttle pause. Same CAN ID, 105. This time we were looking at byte number 6, but the length was 8 bits. It was the full 8 bits, remember? So I'm going to go over here and put in 8 for my bit length, and you'll notice my chart up here changes to tell me which bits we're telling this software to read. We're a little endian. You can see that impact. That's the other thing. You can play with this. If you're trying to get your mind around what little endian and big endian is, you could just simply use this. Put in your start bit position, check the box, and you can see what happens. So we're not at byte number 0 we want to look at. We don't want to look at byte 0. We want to look at byte number 6. So if I click this, now we're looking at the entire byte. It's reading from right to left as it should. 8 position. This is what we want. I'm not going to do any scale or anything in here. We're just going to look at the raw decimal value. Let's just simply leave this as. I'm going to add this to my graph. Now you're going to notice the scale is changed. Now it's 0 to just over 250. In hexadecimal, the maximum value for any byte is 255. 0 to 255. Now remember, we saw the maximum value in hexadecimal, FA. 0 to FA. FA in decimal is 250. So my theory here is when I go maximum, the decimal value of FA is 250. I will see the line go right up to 250 when I hit full throttle. Okay? So let's do that. I'm going to go full throttle in 3, 2, 1. Full throttle. There we go. And we're up to the line 250. 250. Now I'm going to go kind of partial throttle, mid-throttle, and just kind of hold it there. Okay, holding, holding, holding. Then I'm going to go completely off the throttle, back to 0. Boom, there you go. So, the value of 250 makes no sense when we're talking about throttle percentage. Throttle percentage is 0 to 100. You can't have a 250% full throttle. It might make us go faster, but you can't do it. So anyways, what we need to do is we need to scale this. This is where scaling comes into play. And this is important when we're ultimately going to configure the dash with this data. So I'm going to right click on this line, and I'm going to say edit selected graph. And you'll see this scale value down here. Right now we're not scaling. Its default is 1. We know that 250, if I multiply 250 by 0.4, that results in 100, which is what we want, 0 to 100. So you don't have to do the math here. Some of these you can try doing some simple math. I'll show you using some sample DBC files on where you can find these scaling functions for various attributes. That's kind of how I discovered a lot of the scales. I didn't have to guess. I went out and I found them online. I'll show you how to do that. But in this case, this is a simple number. So if I set my scale to 0.4, add this graph, you're going to notice now on the y-axis my scale changes, 0 to 100. And when I hit that maximum throttle just a minute ago, you see now it's at 100. Let's do this again. And now it will scale from 0 to 100. So I'm going to go throttle, partial throttle, kind of hold it. We're up around, what, 40% throttle or so. Give it some more gas, hold it a little bit. See, we're up around 50. Now I'm going to get off the gas completely. Off the gas. Boom. So now we have the right scale, 0 to 100. Okay? So that's how we identify these basic CAN IDs that we're looking for. Now, the other reason we started with brake switches, I've learned that some of these manufacturers are combining critical elements together. So engine speed or RPM, brake switch, throttle position, those are typically grouped together on the same CAN ID. You notice I mentioned RPM, so we now have a clue. It could be that CAN ID number 105 also includes RPM as well. Not only brake switch and throttle position, but RPM as well. So we'll get to that here in a little bit. But that's the thing, is you start to find these patterns when you're playing around with this. And again, based on the frequency, kind of we'll nail you down into certain areas, and then grouping things together, attributes together, critical, brakes, throttle, RPMs, those are all on the same, typically on the same CAN ID. And we'll confirm that once we get to RPM. So that is the basic of doing some initial reverse engineering with CAN bus. We've recorded now the 2 attributes we're looking for. We can start to look at things like temperature, RPM. RPM, we have to obviously have the car running. So that will add a bunch more noise to the CAN bus. But again, we started with brake switch and throttle, so we have a clue, we have an area. We'll start at looking at CAN ID 105, and maybe we'll get lucky. It's already in there. And that will help us narrow it down much, much more quickly. So that's that. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to save this data off. And the beauty of this device is it's recording all this traffic on a file, flat file. So we can replay all this data. We could do a lot of this reverse engineering sitting on our sofa, on our laptop in front of the TV. It makes it really easy to play back with, again, SavvyCAN. And then you can do a lot of reverse engineering, not in the garage, but in the comfort of your home, sitting in front of the TV. All right, so let's go ahead and I'll show you how to do that. So now that I've done some live stream, let me show you on the CL1000 how you go about locating the files you want, and you can copy them over to your hard drive. So first thing you want to do is we're going to shut off the ignition. I'm going to shut off the dash. And so now there's 0 CAN bus traffic across this device. And if you looked at the LEDs, all you see is a little green LED. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to unplug my USB, plug it back in, and now the laptop will recognize it as a USB drive. Again, because there's no CAN bus traffic, it will recognize this as a USB. So if I go over here, I'll plug it from the OBD, and now plug it in. Should see it pop up here. All right, so now we can see a bunch of files here. Here are the 3 files it recorded. Now I've set up the configuration. Every time the file hits a 30 megabit limit, it'll start a new file. And that's variable, you can change that. And then you simply copy and paste these off onto your hard drive, then you can import them into SavvyCAN and play them back. All right. I'm not going to do that here, but that's as simple how you do it. You can delete them here, copy them off, whatever.
All right, we're back inside. We're in front of my desktop here. We're going to go through some reverse engineering in the quiet comfort of my house here to do some reverse engineering using SavvyCAN in this time on my Mac. That's the beauty with SavvyCAN, is you can run it on Mac, Linux, or Windows. And this time I'm going to take one of my handful of recording files that I've done in the car in various scenarios. I've saved them here local, and now I can go and play them back and kind of follow the same process we did moments ago when we were out in the garage in the car. So that's what we're going to do here. So let's go in and see if we can find RPM, and I'm going to follow my own advice and look specifically at CAN ID 0x105. And we think the RPM is in that, given we've already got our brake switch and our throttle position. Again, my research has shown those are all usually in the same CAN ID. And so let's prove this theory here in this scenario. I'm going to go ahead and play back a file. So I'm going to go up here to send frames and playback. And this window pops up. I'm going to load my playback file. And I've got a few here, and this is really where it's important. As you record files out on your car in the garage, name the files what they are to give you a pretty reasonably descriptive file name, so you kind of know the scenario for which you recorded the file. So I'm going to select this one. Start the engine cold up to 75 Celsius, so not quite operating temperature. And I did that so that I could follow temperature signals as well and try to reverse engineer some of those. We're looking for RPM in this case, but this will work just fine. So I'm going to open this file. This is a fairly large file, so this is going to take a few seconds. All right, so this loaded now, and you can see all the CAN IDs are in here for which exists in that file. We suspect, again, based on my theory, that RPM is probably in the same CAN ID as the brake switch and throttle position. That, again, based on a lot of my research looking at other Skoda Group cars. So let's prove out this theory. So I'm going to deselect all my CAN IDs and just play back, and number 105. I'm going to increase the speed on this a little bit. So I'll tune up the burst rate, turn down the delay, the millisecond delay in sending each frame. All right, so now let's hit play. And then over here, we see those packets coming in for just 105. Put this back into overwrite mode, and there we go. Now my first clue here, let's go up to sniffer, and we can watch the packets changing. I'm gonna notch this. So now we'll notice there's bytes 2 and 3 here are zeros. Well, when the RPM is 0, you would expect them to be 0. So on this recording, I do start the engine here after I started the CAN bus recording. So let's see if these values change when the car is started. And that's my clue, by the way, because RPM is such a big number, it's going to span across 2 bytes, in this case 2 and 3. Also, I found in my research RPM values with other DBC files, it is 2 consecutive bytes back to back or side by side. So if you look for double zeros, there we go, we see some change here. This is, and I had started the car. All right, so I'm going to go up to a graphing window, and we're going to graph the 2 bytes that we suspect to be RPM. So we think this is going to be RPM 0x105. We know the total length, that's 2 bytes, so that's 16 bits. We know it's little endian, again, Skoda car, we know that to be true, and then it's bytes 2 and 3. So I'm going to simply click bit position number 16, which is bit number 0 for byte 2. I know this could be a little confusing, but this really does help you once you get the hang of this. All right, now looking at a sample VW DBC file, a Mark IV VW Golf is the DBC sample file I found. I went into that DBC file and I looked at the scaling factor for RPM, which is 0.25. So I'm going to try that scaling factor, that scaling metric here, and see if the resulting value comes out to what it should be. Cold start idle around 1400 RPM. So let's do that. I suspect this is a 0.25 scaling function. I'm going to change the color of this graph to something like green, something bright. We're going to add this graph. Rescale to data. And here we go. So this is already played back a bit, but you can see here I did a cold start and RPM jumps up just to under about 1800, and then cold start RPM right around 1400. About 45 seconds, drops down to its idle speed here. So we are onto it. I'm pretty confident we're onto it here. So if I move this over, scroll in here, we're currently running, grab a data point here, 850 RPM. That's about the current average, which is sweet. I think we got this. So again, as we suspected, 2 bytes in that 105 CAN ID was in fact RPM. And now we could test this. We can go back in the car. We can hit the throttle a little bit here. We can measure. We've got throttle position already, so we can watch throttle position go up in concert with the RPM, which is pretty cool. All right, we've got 3 telemetry attributes pulled off the CAN bus now: RPM, throttle position, and brake switch. That's going to do it for this episode. On the next episode, in part 2, we're going to go through and find a bunch of telemetry around temperature. We're going to look for water temp, oil temp, transmission temp. So I'm going to show you how we do that. And then in part 3, we're going to take all this data and we're going to pump this into our Motec C127 display, and I'm going to show you how we do that. So stay tuned for the next video. That's going to drop real soon. In fact, I'm going to drop these back to back. I considered doing this all in one video, but it was going to be an hour, almost an hour and a half in a single video. I'd figure we would split this up. So this is the conclusion of part 1. I hope to see you over in part 2. We'll keep this process going in reverse engineering the CAN bus on my Audi R8 or a Lamborghini Huracan powertrain CAN bus. in outfitting my C127 display with all this data. So we hope to see you on part 2. Until then, we'll see you next time.